others might continue to join us or figure out their technology as the time goes on. But just want to kind of get started. Well, first, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful evening to talk about the Blue Line extension. What we're going to do here tonight is this is really a project update. We want to keep the community up to speed with all the things that we're working on and what's coming. So we're going to give a little bit of project background, talk about what we heard and learned through the draft route modification report. Basically provide a little bit of a summary for those that may have missed some of the that piece of things, kind of get everybody up to speed on that report, talk about what we heard, and then kind of some of the adjustments that we've made based on all the feedback that was provided by the community. So a little bit more of the technical work that we've done. In preparation for this meeting, we also had the opportunity for folks to kind of ask us questions. We know we've been getting a lot of questions about various things. So we have some questions teed up already for you all from our conversations with out in the world. So we'll start with some questions that have already been submitted prior to the start of this meeting, and then we will open it up for questions in discussion. So a little bit of housekeeping. I forgot to press record, but I think Trevor already got it. So we are recording this meeting. It will be posted online after. So if you have any friends that want to listen in later, they can do so. Throughout the presentation portion, please feel free to add your questions to the chat. You can kind of see that little chat function in the bottom. The presenter might be able to just kind of address them as we're going, or we will for sure get them at the end when we have our question and discussion portion. When we get to the question and discussion portion, also feel free to raise your hand kind of in the bottom of your screen. You'll see that little hand symbol. If you raise that, you jump up to the top of the participant list, and we can kind of call on you. So that's kind of the rundown of the evening, a little bit of how to participate. And before we launch into presentation, I'll just give a quick moment for all of our speakers to introduce themselves. So I'm Sophia Guinness. I manage public involvement for the Blue Line Extension Project, and I'm hoping to kind of guide us through this year to route selection. I will turn it over to Nick and then to Dan to introduce themselves as well.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Nick Landwehr. I'm with Metro Transit, and I am the engineering and design lead for the project, and have been with the project since 2015. So happy to have everybody here that's spending a nice evening paying attention to us. Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, my name is Dan Solar. I work for Hennepin County Public Works, and I'm a project manager and engineer with Hennepin County, and have been working like Nick and Sophia on the Blue Line extension since 2015, and excited to help move this project forward.
Thanks all. Okay, jumping in. So I already kind of talked a little bit about the agenda, but we'll review the project, talk about our report process, a little bit about our anti-displacement work, and our next steps. So the Blue Line extension is part of our overall metro network. So once the Blue Line is constructed, you'd be able to go from the Target North Campus in Brooklyn Park all the way down to the Mall of America or the airport, or transfer to other lines within our metro system. So this is all part of our fast, frequent, reliable, don't need a schedule metro system that helps connect you to the region. And like Dan and Nick teed up, we've been working on this project for some time, but we're looking to modify the route where the previous alignment was on freight rail, and so we're in that process. So a little bit about what our project looks like. The yellow here was our former alignment, and in the Brooklyn Park area, our station locations and our route are staying the same. So just kind of checking in about anything that's changed in that area as we move forward. As we get into Crystal, Robbinsdale, and Southern Brooklyn Park, we parallel the freight railroad very closely, especially in the northern part of that alignment. And then as we get into Robbinsdale along County 81, it's really, really close, and then it starts to deviate a little bit from that previous alignment. We had looked to kind of see the whole gamut of options and places that we could go and really kind of determine that these were our options. So in Minneapolis, we have the choice between Lowry, Washington, and West Broadway and Lyndale as our route options. And so part of what Nick will tee up in a second with our draft route modification report is providing all that technical analysis to help all of us make that decision to go forward. So a little bit about where we are in the process. Kind of like I teed off, in August of 2020, we made that pivot from the freight rail alignment to looking to seek other solutions. We started off that process by putting forth route options and asking if we had missed anything. Once we knew we kind of felt like we had the gamut of things to evaluate, we started looking more deeply into our technical analysis and also where station areas could be, because LRT is not about going through communities, right? It's connecting to communities. So station areas are super important, as well as how LRT could look within those places. That then helped us culminate in our draft route modification report. We had a 30-day comment period, or sorry, excuse me, 45-day comment period on that report. And now the staff is in the process of evaluating all those comments and making any final adjustments that we need before we release kind of the recommendation on the route for a 30-day comment period. And we'll talk about that again in next steps real quick. But we're kind of in this middle period right here between these yellow boxes. So kind of getting everybody grounded on what we've had done in that report and what's changed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to just kind of highlight some of what was in our previous report, and then Dan will take on the next section of what has changed.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sophia. As Sophia said, to reiterate, back in December, we released the draft report, had a 45-day comment period. We received comments back from the community and from our project partners. And really the purpose of that draft report was to take all the documentation and the overall process that we'd gone through since March, a year ago, March, when we released our new route options for the project. So again, that report took those evaluations, the input from the public, all the engagement efforts that we had out in the public in that past year, and incorporated that part into the report and documents it. It also provided an overview of some of the technical work that we did do that informed the route modifications and the pros and cons and the benefits of the different route options. And then it also took those route options and evaluated them against the project principles and the project goals. So the report does not rate the alignments or routes to each other. It relates them or rates them to our project goals and principles. So if you look into the draft report, and it's available on our project website for everybody to spend a nice evening to review through it and see where how we put things together, but how we evaluated each one of the route options to the project principles was based on a goal or assessment of excellent, good, or poor, where poor meant it did not meet the project goals, and therefore you won't see a poor because we just didn't include it in the report. We decided, if they did not meet our project goals, we did not continue on with that effort. So there were things that we looked at, for instance, an option where we went down Olson Memorial Highway to Highway 100. It did not meet our project goals because it didn't serve the communities that we were working with. It didn't really serve for ridership. So again, that would have been poor. So we didn't continue on with it. But good means that meets our project goals, that it provides a benefit in serving the community. So it is a good option for us to move forward with. Excellent means that the route has a unique characteristics and the potential to deliver exemplary positive impacts. That that really meeting the customers that are needing transit services, helping with communities and their development goals, things like that. So this is an example of the matrix as we put them together. And although those route options or segments are lined up next to each other, really what the ratings are that you see in the green and the gold, the excellence and the goods are how they rated to the project goals. You know, the number one project goal is to improve transit access and connections to jobs and to regional destinations along the corridors. Number two was to improve frequency and reliability in transit service to the communities in the corridor. Third one is to provide transit improvements that maximize transit benefits while being cost competitive and economically viable. You know, we need to compete in that federal world with a project like this to make sure that we're competitive against other projects to get funding. Support communities' development goals, so to make sure that the project that we're looking at fits within the community that we're serving. To promote healthy communities and sound environmental practices, including efforts to address climate change. So that's big, that we want to make sure that it's an efficient and clean way to travel. Advance local and regional equity and work towards reducing the regional racial disparities out there. So again, as you look through the different routes, those metrics that were the good, excellent are related to those goals for each one of those routes, and that relates to the Botanu portion of County Road 81 that goes through Crystal and through Robbinsdale and just a portion of Brooklyn Park just north of 694 down to 63rd. The Lowry route, that was the route from Target Field Station through Washington Avenue to Lowry, and a West Broadway route that takes us from Target Field Station over to across 94 up Lyndale Avenue to West Broadway. So just a flavor for the feedback that we got from the comments that we got back on the report. We had 132 responses from the comment form that was provided, 13 email comments. Each one of the communities along the corridor provided a comment letter, Minneapolis, Robbinsdale, Crystal, Brooklyn Park, and Maple Grove also. And then we have on our project website the interactive map project coordinate that people were able to go in there and click on specific areas and provide comments there and have a discussion back and forth. So we had 296 comments from that, and we had open house comments. So we held quite a few open houses throughout the year in all the communities and used the comments that we got from there. And the graph on the other side just kind of gives a little bit of a color of the comments that we had as they're kind of grouped together on minimizing impacts to traffic, pedestrian movement, businesses, homeowners, and the environment. A general support or opposition were some of the comments that were a pretty good percentage of them. Some folks needed more information, so that's why we're having more of these meetings to get out to answer questions and to have those conversations. Make sure that we're providing efficient, well-connected to other transit lines. And that goes back to, I think, our overall transit map that Sophia showed earlier, that we're serving community destinations and we're serving those zero-car households, the folks that are depending on transit to get them to where they need to go. And then other investments needed instead of or in addition to this project. So some comments on other things that we should look at, consider, or be discussing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan, and he'll tell you where we're going with this information.
Thanks, Nick. So yeah, after the work that, we obviously, after the work we've done in kind of researching the possibilities and looking at analyses for the various routes, we're making some updates as we move from a draft report to a route recommendation report. And in the timing that it's taking us to put the final report together, we're having this meeting to update folks a little bit on some of the changes that we made. So you'll see here that we received a request from the city of Robbinsdale to talk about Area 2, which is really the area where, rather than using Burlington Northern Railroad right-of-way for LRT, we're proposing to use County Road 81 right-of-way, that we distinguish in the final report between Area 2A and Area 2B. And that essentially is right at about Highway 100. And if you think about it, the characteristics of 81, Highway 81 is definitely different between north of Highway 100, where it's primarily a little bit of Robbinsdale, but primarily in Crystal, the city of Crystal, and then the city of Brooklyn Park on the north end, that it's primarily a lot of residential properties, but set back off of the roadway. Signal spacing is very far apart, 3 lanes in each direction. It's a little different characteristic than south of Highway 100, where you enter, first of all, downtown, the downtown Robbinsdale area. It's a 4-lane roadway there, a little closer spacing on traffic signals, some direct access points onto Highway 81, all the way down to North Memorial Hospital. So we've split those up in the final report to talk about Area 2A separately from Area 2B. So that's a change that we've made. We took a little closer look at how access is affected for pedestrians and vehicular traffic. One of the comments we got is, what's going to happen to neighborhood or local access along West Broadway versus along Lowry, Washington? And you can see up along Lowry, there's a lot of city streets in the city street grid. They're all open today. There are no medians really along any of Lowry. It's a full open roadway. And so with LRT down the middle, we would have to close the through traffic on a lot of those intersections. And so all those dots you see up there represent areas where we would not allow north-south traffic across Lowry because of LRT. We would concentrate signals at a few spots along Lowry. West Broadway also does the same, but especially in that kind of Lyndale to Irving piece, there's a lot more traffic signals in there already. And some of the areas, we're not closing off quite as many streets. So the city really wanted us to kind of pull out the differences in pedestrian access. And so that's been updated and is now part of our final report in what we're doing with pedestrian access and vehicular access along here. What do we have next? Walksheds was a big piece. How do we differentiate the walkshed areas and the barriers to those walksheds in regard to stations? And so one of the things we identified is that the freeway and I-94 and the bridges on I-94, this represents yellow, less than 5-minute walkshed, green 5 to 10, blue 10 to 15, and so on. And you can see that while along Lowry, the walksheds, at Emerson Fremont and around Penn are very good. When you get to the stations along Washington Avenue at, say, either West Broadway or down at Plymouth, there's whole areas where, because of I-94, you have a fairly long walk, a greater than 10-minute walk to the stations. So that provided much more of a barrier. And so we called that out separately for the Lowry route so that we could identify where there were barriers to getting to stations. And obviously that was one of them. There's not nearly as many residential properties on the east side of 94 as there is on the west side of I-94 as well. The next one here. Sophia, are you moving these or?
I flipped it to the West Broadway Walkshed.
Sorry. Okay, I see a lot of colors. Yeah, so this is why you can see The difference here on West Broadway, on the West Broadway route, there's the stations would come up, the line would come up Lyndale and then go across West Broadway and cut diagonally through there, and it opens up a tremendous amount more. When you talk about a 15-minute walk, which is the blue, that really almost serves all of North Minneapolis within a less than 15-minute walk to at least one of the stations, either at Lyndale and Plymouth, West Broadway and Emerson and Fremont, and West Broadway at Penn. And so it showed that differentiation about serving actual ability for people to get to stations on foot, bicycle, or however else. We also had talked a lot about where were there undeveloped parcels and therefore the potential for redevelopment. And so this map is one that we created for the final report as well. It's not as easy to see, but you can see where we've pointed out where there's undeveloped parcels along here. And certainly the West Broadway area identifies many more undeveloped parcels that are in here. They're the ones that are in more of a darker color. There aren't many along Washington Avenue. So while there's development along there, opportunities for redevelopment are more minimal. Since Lowry is very highly residential, there's less opportunity there as well. And there's many areas along West Broadway that have the potential for both additional acreage and additional vacant properties that are then possible for some level of redevelopment or development in and along that line. That was an important piece to distinguish between these two routes as well. And then we really wanted to continue to call out regional destinations. We feel both of these routes, both the Lowry and the West Broadway route, do a very good job of serving regional destinations. But as you can see, the number along Washington Avenue is a lot less, and along Lowry as well, than the whole kind of what we would call the heart of the North Minneapolis corridor, which is right in and along West Broadway. They both routes serve that kind of upper blue area, which is really Robbinsdale North Memorial Hospital area. So they both serve that. But you can see there's close to 200, as we've identified them, destination points along the West Broadway route. So again, it just kind of tips the scales a little further on a West Broadway Lowry comparison to destination. So these maps that we're showing are all information that we got from cities and from residents and from various commenters on about ways to strengthen the report and things to dig a little deeper into. And so this work that you're seeing here has all been elements of our little bit of a deeper dive into some of these facts to help support this report, primarily in this Minneapolis section.
And before I advance to the next slide, Dan, I just got a comment in chat that one person isn't able to see what I'm presenting. Often that is slow connectivity, but I just wanted to make sure that most of the folks viewing tonight do see the presentation. Getting some thumbs up and head nods. So sorry to the individual that can't see. It might just be slow stuff. The presentation will be posted online, and I think our next section is very verbal. So
right, that's not, Sophia, that's a great point. Why that's not such a big deal on slides that just have words, because we're explaining those by the words we're saying. Some of these maps are key, and so I think if we post how to get to this presentation, people could come back and take a little deeper look into that as well.
So as Dan said, we're really at this point really taking all the feedback that people are asking us to evaluate and make sure that we're weighing in the route modification report to make sure that it's included as part of our recommendation. So that's kind of coming up. Before we get into questions, want to give everybody a little bit an update on some parallel efforts that we are doing, as well as some general next steps of what to expect. Part of the process early in kind of I'd call it the pivot away from the freight rail corridor, kind of the part about making sure that we are serving current residents and businesses and that people aren't displaced unintentionally as part of this process became a major theme. And so, sometimes that was comments about construction support and what that could look like, as well as just kind of the making sure that the benefits were for the residents and businesses within the corridor. And the project team took that request from the community very, very seriously. And since we didn't really have a program or policies set up specifically to think about how you do that in context of a full light rail process, we began this process to launch an anti-displacement working group that would come up with and develop a set of policies, procedures that could be implemented as part of this project. So again, some of the goals would be to ensure that this investment that we are doing to improve transit and connect people's lives also builds and protects community assets, benefits those that are there, and looks at things like what we could do with housing and all of that kind of stuff. So since this is a multi-government effort, right? It is some of these policies and procedures might come from the Blue Line project itself, but some of it might come from the Met Council or Hennepin County or the various cities along the line, as well as philanthropic efforts like we saw on Green Line to bring dollars to the project. We felt it was really important to have kind of a facilitated process that could go very deep into it. And I see Ricardo says in chat, do we have a budget for this? We don't. It's the same reason why we don't have a full budget for this project, the Blue Line Extension project overall yet, is that we can estimate kind of roughly how much we think it's going to cost, but you really need the programs and details to really put dollars and procedures behind it. So to say we have a budget for it now would be kind of cart before the horse in some sense, but I think we can say at this point that both Hennepin County and the Met Council, and not speaking for our city partners, but at least for our project partners, are very committed to really doing this quite well and looking forward to the process. So as part of making sure that process and all these governments kind of come together, as well as the community, we contracted with the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs to kind of lead this process. And C. Terrence Anderson, who is a North Side resident, is kind of the project manager for that and has helped facilitating the working group basically over the next year to come to these recommendations and policies. That won't be the end of the work. We would anticipate that what is needed from the anti-displacement working group will probably live in some way through the life of the project. So some things will spin off right away, they maybe even during their process, right, that could be implemented. Other things will be long-term and part of the project. So this is really getting us teed off to have this basis of this work and kind of shared community understanding. So the group met for the first time just last week. The first meeting was very just, I'd call it procedural and introductions and details. As the group moves into some bigger sessions, they'll really kind of get into the details and look at the various challenges as well as putting recommendations forward with them. So we're very excited about this work. I think it's an opportunity to figure out, LRT itself is an investment in our communities and a way to connect. We know that transportation having reliable transportation is an important aspect for our communities, and so this work also gives us the opportunity to do it even better and to make sure that we are trying to for example, we evaluate things like zero-car households and really trying to serve all people with this project. And so having this work helps ensure that those efforts and what we want to see with transit actually, has those benefits. So Really exciting parallel effort that we hope a lot of fruit comes out of it, and I think the project team is looking forward to that discussion, as well as our leadership. So that'll be a thing that we'll continue to update everybody on as we move to kind of more of the Rails portion of the LRT. And so with that, you can expect us releasing a route modification report in the spring that'll include all of the recommendations for how this line will look. That doesn't mean that we're shovel ready, right? That kind of selection of the route just actually begins a long process that we have to go through to do environmental review, to seek municipal consent, to develop a lot of details, to begin station area planning and some of those other supportive efforts that happen with it. And so, we're 3 to 4 years away still from construction, as well as a few years in construction itself. And that's just kind of a way to say is that we're beginning to address a lot of the issues that community is bringing up, but a lot of things will be addressed kind of throughout the process overall. One of the first questions that came into chat, and I don't know if everybody can see it, but it was how come minimal residential disruption isn't a project goal? And that kind of comes out in a few ways. One, we do have a project principle of minimizing impacts to properties, but our environmental process is also a time where we can document impacts and look at ways, either if we can't avoid those impacts, to minimize and mitigate them. So kind of all of a long-term thing that kind of goes along the way. And before I kind of we start taking a lot of questions in chat, I'm going to be respectful of those that submitted some beforehand, and I'll just kind of read them off, and we'll have Dan and Nick take turns answering them. So one question that we get often is how is this final decision going to be made to select the route? So Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about the process to have the Hennepin County Met Council kind of take action on the final report?
Sure. So as we rolled out the draft report and took a lot of comments, that started to narrow this piece down. Then what you saw today is what we presented today is a lot of the deeper dive stuff that we did in some of the areas to look at this in a little more detail. What we will then do as a staff is we will make a final or make a recommended route selection. We'll recommend a route for the LRT alignment from Target Field Station up to Target North Campus in Brooklyn Park. We will make that recommendation to our corridor management, to our business advisory committee and community advisory committee for input. We'll make that recommendation as well to our corridor management committee, made up of representatives from municipalities and other entities along the alignment, and then they will recommend to both the Met Council and Hennepin County the direction to move forward to bring this recommended route to the Federal Transit Administration, who we're working with nationally on the implementation of this, as well as the other LRT projects that we have here in this region. And so ultimately, the route selection will be guided by the Hennepin County Board as a primary funder of the local share, as well as the owner of the LRT system, Metro Council, and those two entities will then make that final decision to move this forward.
Thanks, Dan. Another question that we've got in multiple forums is just impacts during construction, right? It's something that we've gotten a lot of comments on. And so what we have on the slide is meant to be a capture all of various ways that people have been asking us this question, as well as a couple that were submitted for this meeting itself. And just basically talking a little bit about what we do to help protect businesses and community assets, as well as, I mean, even residents, as we begin and go through construction. And maybe just also teeing off that, we know we need a construction support program, but some of those details are still underway, and maybe give folks an idea of what it looked like on Central Corridor.
Yeah, I could add to that a little bit too, Sophia. As we go, well, the anti-displacement working group is one place to kind of identify, how to help and protect folks from displacement from the project. But, the environmental phase that we go into will help us identify those community assets, identify where the impacts are going to be, and help us identify mitigation measures that we need to work through design into construction. And then as we get into design, we work very closely with property owners, with our project partners, the cities, the county, on what we can do to minimize and mitigate for impacts that are happening. So we handle that early on in that environmental phase, then into the design phase, and then when we get into construction, as Sophia said, there's a lot of work that we do and outreach in the community during construction to coordinate, and construction is messy. It's inconvenient, but we try to do what we can to make limit the disturbance as much as possible. Maintain access for businesses and property owners, and get in and out as quickly as we can.
Dan, maybe we talked a little bit about Central Corridor and some of the construction support that occurred.
Well, so, I mean, Central Corridor very similarly to both, a lot of West Broadway, to a lot of the Robbinsdale area, including downtown, including some parts up in Brooklyn Park. We're building LRT in a roadway adjacent to existing businesses with access and doorways and ins and outs and things like that. So certainly we will put in place measures to require the contractors to provide along here, to provide adequate access in the businesses at all times, to make sure that they have safe, well identified ways to keep businesses open and moving during construction. At the same time, though, some of the businesses, especially small businesses, were very worried and needed some additional help through construction. And so during that time, the project team from Met Council, the folks at Ramsey and Hennepin County, City of St. Paul and Minneapolis, worked with various entities like what was called at that time a Central Corridor Funders Collaborative to help provide things like small business assistance, to help businesses, especially, not worrying about, say, Target or Cub Foods as much as small businesses, with a little help with things that they needed at that time, bookkeeping, advertising, things that helped keep businesses flourishing. And so we will look to put those same measures in place along here, especially to help. There are small independently owned businesses all the way from the north end through Crystal, Robbinsdale, and into Minneapolis along this alignment, and to help with those as well. We also run into various needs to help make sure that people realize we're open for business, and even though this is construction, we still want to get people to and from these locations. One of the things we've talked about a little bit on this project that's different is, what about the possibility of temporarily relocating some businesses during construction? And that's not a one size fits all thing, right? Pretty hard to relocate a barbershop or a hair salon with all of their infrastructure, but may not be so hard to move a small firm that's primarily office space, and we could move them temporarily somewhere else. So all things that we will look at to help protect and preserve businesses before, during, and after construction.
Okay, next question. You guys can decide which one of you wants to take it. So, can as part of our design, could LRT be elevated or buried underground?
The answer is yes, but I would qualify that with, we're proposing for the most part and along the alignment to have an at grade running light rail, because that's the most accessible to people of all abilities. When you start going above or below ground, that starts bringing in, stairs, elevators, that more of an impediment to access to those stations, where as opposed to at grade, folks can go crosswalk to a station platform, get on the platform and stay at a level. So that's probably the most efficient, most convenient for all of our customers for that. With that said, though, we do have elevated, we are potentially proposing elevated sections along this corridor. For instance, and usually those are put in when there's a geographical barrier. So at North Memorial, if we were to go along the Lowry route or the West Broadway route, either route, we would have to go on a bridge structure over the bridges that are being constructed right now at Lowry and West Broadway. And with that, there'll likely be a station that's above grade in that location. So, with that involves, again, elevator, stairways and stuff. So when necessary, they are considered. Now, I'll let Dan jump on this too. Underground, a tunnel is those become very, very not only just the inconvenience for folks to access it, but the cost for construction is very high. Underground is 6 to 10 times higher than just at grade in rough magnitudes, but also the construction of it is very disruptive. When you're putting in that tunnel, you're usually opening up a big hole in the ground to build that tunnel and then put it back into place, and it takes a long time. So those become very disruptive during construction. So,
I think that's right, Nick. I mean, I might add, the simple answer to can the LRT be elevated or buried underground, of course, is yes, right? There's elevated LRT and subway systems all over the world. That's the simple answer. With regard to this particular extension, I will say we have looked at and we are not considering any segment of this to be underground or built in a tunnel. Existing utilities, narrow rights of way, groundwater conditions, soil conditions, and just the construction difficulty of tunnel construction, especially if it relates in tunnel construction of station areas underground, just do not warrant building any of this blue line extension in an underground section. Elevated, not quite as easily dismissed. There are areas where, for various reasons, be they traffic reasons or space or needing to connect to other things, parts of either the tracks or adjacent roadways or pedestrian crossings or other elements of the project will be elevated. And so it might be in some cases a pedestrian crossing is elevated, like we're talking about doing up in Crystal, or maybe elevating the Highway 81 through lanes over Bass Lake Road in order to provide grade separation there and better access to LRT at grade. Or, as Nick mentioned, around North Memorial Hospital in order to get around the West Broadway bridges to bring some of it elevated. Obviously, we're going to be elevated over Highway 100 and elevated over Highway 610 and elevated over I-94 as we come out of downtown Minneapolis. So there will be spots where having the tracks grade separated makes sense from both a safety standpoint and a geographic standpoint and a access standpoint. And so those will be part of the project.
I've been skipping some of the questions in chat to come back to them, but since this is directly related to what we're talking about, Peter's asking, is above ground, so I think elevated, cost, is the above ground cost, so I think it's asking if it's cost more than at grade or less impact or usage, to kind of spell that out a little bit.
Thanks for that question, Peter. It's hard to answer about the less impact on usage, right? Because if a station is in the right spot and if it's serving the right destinations, I mean, people are going to get to the station. And so they'll go up to the station or access it at grade. But with regard to construction cost and long-term maintenance cost, it is definitely lower cost to build it at grade than in the air, simply by structure cost alone, right? The tracks might cost the same, but not necessarily the elevated structure itself. Less impact on usage for business locally, not usage for the rail.
Maybe a way to take this question is, one of the things that we looked at is we actually, for a while, looked at more elevated segments. And one of the impacts to elevated segments was that it actually kind of blocks business signage and usage. So, sometimes having LRT at grade might actually be more appropriate for businesses because it you still have your business functions. People are walking and driving to your business, but then LRT is just kind of in the middle of the roadway versus kind of shadowing above. And so getting it to the right scale and fit within the community is important and part of our decision making. Okay, taking the next question. Can other traffic, pedestrian, bicycle, landscape improvements kind of be made as part of this project? So maybe a little bit about process and what we look at.
Yes, actually, yes. We look at those connections. Well, as we're constructing this, our routes are in roadway sections, and those roadways, we accommodate more than just cars. We need to be paying attention to pedestrians, bikes, with that, and then also just the connections for all those. The intersections for traffic to go through. We would work with that along with the project, as well as we need to make sure that folks can get to these stations, that they're accessible. So we make sure that we focus on pedestrians and bicycles, how they would get to a station location. For bicycles, if we need to put in bike racks or lockers, or so the trains have ability to take certain bicycles on them also. But we really will focus on those. And landscape also, as we're going down and looking at alignment, if there's landscaping there, we work with our project partners on what their vision of landscaping would be. But we know if we're disturbing existing vegetation out there, that there's mitigations that we need to do for that. So that would be part of the project also.
But I think, Nick, I want to add that not only directly adjacent to and part of where we're building LRT. Let's take West Broadway, for example. If we're building LRT on or as part of West Broadway, we're going to reconstruct West Broadway. And that includes, the street, the sidewalks, the pedestrian crossings, the traffic signals, and all of those things. But we're also going to open our eyes a little wider than just West Broadway. And so as we look at adjacencies to the alignment, and especially in station areas, if we notice there's a school 3 blocks away, or there is at North Memorial Hospital, the connection to the hospital, in Robbinsdale, there's all of the downtown area. Is there a sidewalk connection? Is there a bike path connection that needs to be made? Should we be extending a pedestrian facility so that people don't only have access to LRT on West Broadway, for example, but they have a way to get there from a various destination that's clear? Now, we can't go 10 miles away in each direction, but we can certainly take a look at those, for example, those Walkshed maps, and say, what are the best ways from both a signing standpoint and a pedestrian access standpoint that we can help get people there? The other thing that I want to add here is that one of the other things is, because we're talking about putting an LRT system on these roadways, and therefore need to reconstruct them, we're also going to take a comprehensive look at all of the underground infrastructure that's in place in and along these roadways. So water mains, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, the private utilities like XL or Comcast or Centerpoint or whatever they may be. We want to get those things done at the same time so that we don't build LRT and then rip up a street 2 years later in order to put in new water services. And so all that gets done together as well. So all that can get put together as we make this infrastructure improvement.
I'll take one last question that we got in advance, and we'll tee this off to Nick, but we included the map so that just to kind of help Nick explain. And so the question was, we hear that there's different options along the routes in Minneapolis, and kind of what's the purpose of all of the options, and kind of how do you read them?
Yeah, so thanks, Sophia. On each of the alignments, we show quite a few different options, or at least multiple options along those alignments, and those are what's signified on each, either the green or the purple. We've separated them down into segments, 1 through 7, as we're going through West Broadway, or 1 through 4 up West Broadway, and then 5 through 7 up the Lowry. And each one of those yellow signifiers has an option in there that's on our website to review. And what those are is to take a look at, we know that there's going to be impacts. There's going to be impacts from construction and to buildings. So we're looking at, the different configurations that we could put together to try to have light rail that serves the community very well. Try to reduce those impacts from the light rail, or if there are impacts, is there something that we can do that would mitigate for it? So can we, for instance, with West Broadway, look at an option where we incorporate 21st in there for either light rail or traffic or both in that area where it's really a pinch point there, and that would be that segment 3, why there's so many different options in there. Those, as we get into environmental and through design, we'll start weighing those out. We'll work with everybody to determine what the best option is and narrow it down and move forward with that single alignment.
Okay, I'm going to start taking questions from chat, especially those that we kind of didn't address as we're going. For everybody's benefit, before I do that real quick, because we might skip back into slides to address questions. Everything is available on the Blue Line Project website, so the event itself is recorded, and all the materials that we're showing tonight will be online after the meeting. So just a good resource for everybody. And that was a question as well. Is this slide deck going to be shared? We'll get it posted shortly after the meeting as well, so you guys can look back at it any time. A couple comments Nathan noted when we were showing the Walkshed about how that looks for West Broadway. And then a question from Peter would be, would you consider adding another station on Broadway to increase access even more?
I think the simple answer to that is sure, yes. We have gotten that question before. We think, as we start here, we think that a station on West Broadway at Penn, which serves kind of the Penn area as well as a connection to the Sea Line, that a station somewhere in and around Emerson Fremont in that area serves as a connection to the D Line as well as to that kind of retail area there, and then a station down along right as we come over 94, right along Lindale and Plymouth also makes some sense there as well. That's what we heard in our public engagement. That's a lot of the feedback we got as we visited about it. Does that mean that can only be 3 stations? No. But of course, what we're always balancing is on an LRT route, how many stops is the right number of stops. It's not a commuter rail, so it's not meant to stop, or an express route, so it's not meant to stop once and then go into downtown or go further. It's also not meant to stop every block. So what is exactly the right mix? And so stations also take more room. And so when they take more room, that means more potential for right-of-way acquisition. Is that something that also that the community wants to face? So as we do the environmental work, we'll continue to look at this and evaluate that. I would not put it out of the question right now, but we don't have any currently. We're not sitting on any spots where we're saying, boy, we really wish we could have a station here, but we haven't identified it. That may come as we do more work, but right now we're not seeing it.
So next question from Ron, and I'm going to paraphrase, I think, a little bit of his question, is basically, how do we interpret our Walksheds? He notes that, for example, serving an apartment versus a single family home would provide more benefit. You're serving more people. So I'll maybe tee it off a little bit in the sense that, when we think about who these routes are serving, we're both looking at how long it takes to get to a station, as well as the kind of uses within that Walkshed. So whether they be, lots of jobs or a lot of commercial destinations, or just kind of density of population. So all important considerations. I'll tee it to Nick and Dan to add to that question, to that response.
Yeah, so Walksheds, I think there's a couple questions in there, but typically when we look at Walksheds, that 10-minute Walkshed is probably the comfortable or average Walkshed that's looked at in that station area planning. Although there's some folks that would easily walk 20 minutes to get to a station, 15 maybe not a big deal, but usually that 10-minute is that comfortable Walkshed that's kind of focused on in that area, and it's based on just really a distance measurement, and I know that we take a look at having to it's not a direct as a crow flies from one point to a station. It's taking a look at going down the sidewalk or those pathways to get to the station. So it's actually a distance measurement that 5 minutes is based on, and it's based on an industry accepted pace for walking. It's like I can't remember what it is, like 3 point some feet per second. So that's how it's laid out.
Thanks, Nick. I think you started to address the next kind of question about Walkshed as well, which is kind of that threshold of destinations. How do we know something is within a Walkshed?
Yeah, and that's where that probably that 10 minutes is a good example of as when you look at that's usually where folks are comfortable. If they're going somewhere, they get to a station, and if it's within that 10-minute walk, that's probably a good destination point, or a good way to measure that destination.
I just want to acknowledge that we kind of took a side to address Ricardo's question about budget regarding some of our anti-displacement efforts. Again, kind of the commitment to the funding, while we still need to put together the full scope of what that work will include. And going on to some of his next question.
And Sophia, before we go on from that, what I want to understand is that when it comes to the budget for things that are involved with the anti-displacement working group, some of those recommendations that'll come out of the working group may very well be things that can be put in and implemented as part of the project. Okay, easy enough, right? The budget can include those. We'll put them in as part of the project and it'll be done. Some of them may be recommendations on policies or practices that aren't eligible for costs as part of the project budget, but that doesn't mean they won't get funded. That means that we need to turn to Hennepin County, to Met Council, to our cities to look for funding sources and ways to implement those recommendations that are parallel to, but not directly eligible for project costs. So both of those things can happen, and both of those will be open items to be researched for funding.
Good point, Dan. And maybe that spurs the conversation. I think of all of our agencies are also going to be looking at kind of the things that we have in our toolbox that could potentially be put forth to this effort. And then kind of a follow-up question to that is basically, how does federal funding impact our timelines? When do we get our federal funding? And how does that kind of fit in with our environmental review? And I'll kind of maybe tee this off. So we are currently in a new starts process that kind of gets us a spot in line for federal funding. The project kind of has to kind of keep chugging along to show progress within that program, and we seek basically our federal match, which is 50%, around the time that we enter construction. The project team has tried to see if we can do that within a certain set of time, so that maybe matching it up with this administration, that'd be great. Would be an aggressive schedule, but obviously a project goal that we're undertaking. And why don't you guys kind of build off of that?
I mean, Ricardo's question, Sophia, is really good. How does federal funding affect our timeline? Federal funding does affect our timeline, because while we don't know at this point, as we sit here today, whether we will receive federal funding for this particular project, like is the case for every LRT project, we in Minnesota and the Twin Cities here move forward and develop these LRT projects with the following the guidelines, with the desire and the belief that we are going to apply for and we are going to receive federal funding in order to implement the project. So as we make decisions about how to do environmental review, how to purchase right away, how to make design decisions, how to build the project, all of those decisions are done on a timeline that assumes that the day will come when we do apply for a full funding grant agreement and are eligible to receive federal funding. That does not happen before the environmental review. In fact, it's very important that the environmental review steps of the project happen, and is FTA's requirement that the environmental work happen all pre-federal funding applications. And so if you remember, even though we worked on the previous Blue Line project for 4 or 5 years, and we're advancing that project well on its way, we still had not applied for federal funds. Do we believe we're going to apply for federal funds? Yes. Do we believe we're going to develop a project that qualifies for federal funds? Yes, we do. That's all part of what we're doing. But that doesn't happen until the environmental work is done, until the engineering is much more advanced. Timeline, at least probably 2 to 3 years from now.
To take the next question, I'm going to tee up a certain slide, which was the commenters noting that they heard that potentially the West Broadway route is preferred. I'm a little disappointed about that, and kind of looking for the basis of that. And I'm pulling it to this slide as a part of the way to answer that. In our draft report, both Lowry and West Broadway scored very well. You can see that West Broadway scored a little bit better, and part of our due diligence right now and taking community feedback and doing this additional analysis that we set out was to confirm basically whether or not these ratings still look the same, kind of that what differentiates these routes, and staff will put forth our recommendation on the route about within the next month in the spring, to kind of officially move through that process. I'll look at my colleagues if they want to add anything.
I think that's well said, Sophia. I mean, they're both routes that would work for an LRT alignment for a lot of the reasons that we reviewed today. There is the West Broadway route just has a nod over the Lowry route as better serving the goals needed for an LRT system in this area.
Next question is about the future, and could a link between Target North Campus and east to the North Star Station be explored? So kind of connecting with up in the northern region of our project.
Again, sure. Anything can happen if there's a desire by the local communities, funding, and justification for such a thing. I will say that even as we've been advancing this current project, the city of Maple Grove has been reaching out about, hey, what about a link over to Maple Grove at some point from Brooklyn Park or some way, maybe a separate line, maybe a spur, maybe some way to get out to Brooklyn Park. And then, of course, then all of a sudden, Rogers says, hey, what about us? And then, maybe Anoka or Champlin, or maybe people say, no, enough, no more rail. So is it a possibility? Sure. We're not currently working on that, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be explored.
The next question is, do we need any buildings or businesses to construct light rail, to accommodate light rail? I think that's kind of overall in our alignment, there's a few places, so we can kind of talk about a high level.
Mm-hmm. And I think the answer to that is yes. And that's why we offer up a lot of the different options that are in each one of those segments. And if you look at the drawings or the layouts that we have for those, there are properties that are indicated in pink, and that indicates that option would have the potential for impacting a building with that alignment. So again, we will work on everything we can do in design to minimize those impacts, to stay away from those buildings. I mean, really the project here is to serve the community and not change it. It's to fit within the goals of that community. But yes, and we do have some examples of where buildings may be impacted and options to try to mitigate or try to avoid those impacts.
Got a comment about the elevation question, and the person is commenting, don't elevate, it'd be a shame to have to drive under the train when driving through town. We kind of addressed a little bit about the cost differential, about at grade versus elevated versus underground. Any other things that you want to add to that conversation? I think we had pretty well covered, but you see no from both of you. Okay, going on to the next question. It's a little bit about our other project. So noting that the Southwest project is going over budget and having kind of some issues, potentially construction damage, and there's the audit coming up. Basically, how's the Blue Line going to do things differently, both in terms of the decisions we make and how the project is managed. And when the audit, I believe they're referring to Southwest, is done, we'll be hosting a session on hearing about those findings. And I would say a lot of the audit is looking at the Southwest extension specifically, but we will learn things from that we can potentially apply to the Blue Line. The Met Council welcomes an audit. I mean, these projects are very, very complex, and doesn't hurt to have people take a look. So we welcome that process. Maybe a little bit about what we're doing differently. I'll kick it off while I'll give some time for my colleagues to add to the answer. But some of it is that we know where there's challenges, right? Like tunnels are very complex and challenging to do. We don't have tunnels. We always are taking the lessons learned in and applying that to future projects. Anybody want to add?
Well, certainly tunnel construction has been a difficult piece of Southwest. Also, I can say that, you know, that there are numerous challenges in building a light rail line next to an existing and operating freight rail line, which a lot of Southwest LRT's project is doing as well. And so, this blue line extension essentially will be the fourth leg of the light rail system in the Twin Cities. The Hiawatha line was built 15 to 17 years ago. And so that was built along Highway 55 and in downtown Minneapolis and down underneath the airport. And so we have learnings from that, how we did things on Central Corridor, Green Line, which I worked on for 7 years. We did a number of things differently than were done during Hiawatha. We did things right. We did things not right. We learned things from that. Some of those things were implemented on Southwest. Southwest has posed its own significant set of challenges. Southwest is the first time we've really undertaken LRT construction that wasn't primarily in a street or adjacent to a street. And so building in railroad right away and building the number of structures that are associated with Southwest has been difficult. There were also difficulties in just implementing that project during various different federal administrations and different governor administrations. And so all of that plays into account. And so we'll take all of those learnings and what's gone well and what's not gone so well and apply those here. I will say we believe we know how to build LRT in the Twin Cities in a street running scenario. We know things that didn't work on our experiences with University Avenue, and so it won't be the first time we address this kind of construction along a street running LRT, and we'll use that to our advantage. We may pull together sessions on learnings. We may be told how we're going to implement parts of the blue line extension based on what the audit or the legislature just tries to do. But in any case, we'll continue to use what we've learned to help implement and make this on its own a better project than any of the ones that came before it.
Maybe also to add to that is want to acknowledge that these projects carry risk, right? Whenever you're taking on a big undertaking, it is part of the process. As we go from the small percentage of engineering that we have now to construction ready plans and getting into construction, the project team as part of our process tries to basically minimize those risks, identify them, address them, anticipate them. But with complexity, there always comes risk. And so part of doing better and looking forward is just being very diligent about managing that process. And I think it's really important to be transparent with the community, though, that things can come up until things are fully in operation that you don't necessarily anticipate. So that is always part of the process as well. And so we do our due diligence to manage that as we go along. I think the last question is a little bit of a combination of a comment, but a little bit of a combination of a question, which is Nathan notes that kind of that space between Penn and North Memorial, wondering if that could be a place that maybe consider a station, but also noting that adding stations could potentially add time. And so that is correct, Nathan. As we add stations, stopping an LRT does add time to the line. And so we do evaluate the difference between adding that travel time to potentially the additional populations or people that we could serve by adding that station. So sometimes adding the station decreases ridership instead of adding them. So that is also part of the analysis that we undertake when we think about potentially adding additional locations. Did I capture that, guys? Want to add anything else?
Yeah, very, very good, Sophia. All important considerations when you make that decision is what's the overall, how will a station in any one area affect, and not only just transportation as well. What about redevelopment goals? What about other things that can happen around redevelopment around a station area and how does that get affected, and how does that help support or not support another station in any given area.
Yeah. And another thing, I think Dan kind of alluded to it before, to talk a little bit before, when we do cite a station, they do take up quite a bit of room. I mean, they need to be fairly flat and tangent, meaning straight, so the train can meet up with the station platform. And the light rail vehicles are almost, they're 270, so that station platform needs to be about 300 feet long, and then you have the approaches to get up to that station because the station's elevated. It suddenly starts taking a long block of flat, straight area that station needs to fit into. So, finding that area and limiting the impacts by the construction of it is something that we take into consideration also.
I think that is all of the questions that we have tonight. I'll kind of talk for a minute just in case people have other things that come to mind. But I'll bring us, sorry to scroll through things quickly. I know that gives everybody a little bit of vertigo. I try not to do so. So on the Blue Line Extension Project website, bluelineext.org, again, we have all of this information. If you have any follow-up questions, the project team is always happy to come and meet with you. So even if you represent an organization and want us to come and talk to the whole group, the outreach coordinator's contact information is online. So you can look for Panu Vu and Kristen Yeager. I said Kristen again, Kirsten Yeager, as people to connect with in your community to get to have additional discussion. And from the overall project team, expect more from us in about a month as we get ready to release this route recommendation. And we will definitely have multiple opportunities for folks to comment and influence our process as we move forward. So come seek us out, and we will seek you out. And thank you for joining us on what was a beautiful beginning of spring evening. Any other closing thoughts?
Last chance for questions. Throw them in there.
I'll take that as no more questions, but thank you for joining us tonight. We hope this presentation answered many of your questions, as well as kind of pulled back the hood a little bit of all the work that we're doing kind of in the interim. And everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good night, all.